Hi, and welcome to my newest chess openings course, Master the King's Indian Attack. The King's Indian Attack is a chess opening that used to be a lot more popular than it is today. You don't see a lot of people playing it, and I find that very interesting because it's a very effective opening, especially against certain options that your opponent may choose to play, like the French defense. And one of the reasons I think that it's not as popular as it used to be is simply because most people have learned to start the game with e4 or d4. And so most people go into those kinds of lines. If you start the game with knight to f3, then you can go into the King's Indian attack. This is one way to start it. The King's Indian attack has more than one way to begin because oftentimes, depending on what our opponents do, we will transpose into it. When you play knight to f3 at the very beginning, this is actually called the ready opening, named after a famous grandmaster named Reddy. And the great thing about it is it's super flexible. So we wait to see how black wants to set up their position, and usually we will fianchetto our bishop and go into the King's Indian attack. So in this introductory lesson, I'm just going to show you guys a couple different scenarios, different ways that we will go into the King's Indian attack and how we want to be thinking about it. So it's really a flexible opening. If black sees us play the ready, oftentimes they don't really know what we're going to do. So it keeps them sort of guessing. So they may take their knight out, and one thing we can do is immediately fianchetto our bishop. So depending on what they do, they can fianchetto their bishop, they can play out knight to the center. We will go ahead and get into our formation that we want, and they may just start into a sort of normal setup. And then what we're going to do is we're going to end up playing d3, and then we're going to play e4 at the appropriate moment. So I'll just give you just a very basic example. We're going to set up, or we can play knight to d2 first, and then we're going to play here. So the King's Indian attack is an opening that's really flexible, as I said. It can be used in various different situations, and it can be used to keep your opponent guessing. If most opponents now are used to playing against e4 or d4 when they're black, then when you start with a ready opening, knight to f3, and then transpose into King's Indian, oftentimes you'll be taking them into territory that they're a little bit less familiar with, and so they'll be a little bit less comfortable. And as I say, in all of my chess openings courses, especially when you're playing blitz, knowing these openings and making your opponent have to guess is really useful because it makes them have to take time off the clock. So if you're playing 10-minute games and your opponent has to think an extra 30 seconds or a minute on a lot of their moves, you're going to get a huge time advantage when you know exactly what it is that you want to accomplish. So that's just one way that you can go straight into the King's Indian, is by starting with the ready, which is this move here, knight to f3. But there's another really effective way that we can go into it, and that is actually to play e4. So in this case, we want to see what our opponent's going to do. e4, obviously, is the most popular starting move in chess for white. We can go into all different kinds of openings from this, but we have to see what our opponent is going to do. The player with the black pieces can choose whether or not they want to simply play e5 and maybe go into an Italian or a Spanish, whether or not they want to do something like play c6 and then play the Caro-Kann by following up with d5, which is a lesser known opening for a lot of chess players, or if they want to do something like play the French defense. So when people play the French defense, and I've got a whole course on the French defense as well, which you can have a look at if you want to learn everything there is to know about the French defense. I've got a lot of detail and all the variations for that opening. But when we play e4 and then our opponent plays this move e6, they go into the French. And the typical line that is taught by most grandmasters, and that I usually, especially used to play myself, is to play d4, and then black will play d5. And from here we have various different variations that you can go into, whether you play the advanced variation and you play e5, or whether you play the knight to c3, or even the knight to d2 in order to not block in this pawn. You're going to go into the French defense. And it's a very well-known opening. It's been studied and analyzed for many decades. And because of that, people who like to play the French, they're very familiar with what to do usually, depending on what you do. If you choose to play the advanced variation like this, with e5, they will go here, and then you can play some various moves. But black usually knows what to do. If you don't play the advanced variation, you go here, they may pin that knight and threaten to take this pawn. Again, you can transpose it into the advanced variation. If we take, we go into basically, this is called the winnower variation, etc., etc. So in order to kind of throw black off, when we see that they play this move e6 in reply to e4, instead of playing a typical French and playing d4, we can do what Garry Kasparov actually used to like to do against the French defense to throw his opponents off a little bit and play a much older opening. He would play the King's Indian attack against the French. So he would play d3 instead of d4. Our opponents will still usually play d5, and they want us to open the center. Now, if we take and they take back here, we've helped them develop their bishop, and they have a nice opening. They've got more space, so we don't want to do that. All we do is we simply play this knight to d2, and then we're going to set up our situation over on the king side with a fianchettoed bishop, and we're going to go into the King's Indian attack. And so in this course, you're going to look at a whole bunch of different variations from the French defense and how this may play out and how we want to best adjust ourselves to what our opponents do in order to get a really good opening. And usually we'll end up attacking the king, which is one of the reasons why this is such a fun opening to play. The King's Indian attack usually will end up with either a locked center where we can attack our opponent's king, which I'll show you guys how to do, or if the center pops open, you will have a really strong bishop fianchettoed here on g2. So a couple different ways that this might play out is if black is just really used to the way they usually play the French, they're going to go ahead and play c5 automatically. We're going to basically just ignore these moves, and we're going to go into our fianchetto position. Black can take the knight here, and here we can either put our bishop in fianchetto, or if we want to, we can even kick this knight. We can go back and then defend this pawn and make this pawn a thorn in black's side. It's another common thing that happens oftentimes in the King's Indian attack formation, where we have this advanced pawn and we defend it multiple times so that it sort of cramps black's style, and it makes it so this dark squared bishop, which is typical of the French defense, is going to be a weak piece. It's going to be hard to activate it. So in this course, I'm going to show you guys all the different ins and outs of this opening and how we can get a really good situation here. But typically, what you're going to end up with, the last thing I'll show you in this intro lesson, is going to be something where, like the knight here, we will have a castled fianchetto position. We will have a pawn here in the center. Black oftentimes will push this pawn down because they think that they're getting space. And our goal is going to be to attack on the king side. And whenever the center is locked like this with pawns and it's closed, you can feel free to move the pawn in front of your king up like this. In both the King Indian defense and the King's Indian attack, this is the pattern that you will often see because your opponent thinks that they're going to gain space over on the queen side. But then once they do that, we can gain space on the king side. We have a really clear objective. We're going to attack the king, and they're going to expand on the queen side. They're going to do something like this and look to attack on the queen side. But the thing is, our attack is on the king, so it's more dangerous. And if it comes faster, as it usually will do, especially when we're white, we have one tempo advantage over black, then our attack is going to be more dangerous. And that's what you guys are going to learn about in this course. So from there, we will get straight into it, and I'll show you guys some of the key variations that we want to know.